Now, one precursor to being able to do this well is you got to get to know people, right? So, what if I didn't know who was in the ER working that day? What if I didn't know my counterpart that was going to be assuming care for the next shift? What if I didn't know the people down on med surg when I was an ICU nurse? Those kind of things. So, this really compels us to get to know each other, to build relationships, really start to be able to know a bit about each other so that we can manage them up.
Welcome to Culture Change RX, the podcast for healthcare professionals that are committed to creating a thriving workplace culture, improving the experiences of employees and patients, and ultimately unlocking their organization's next level of potential. I'm Sue Tetzlaff, your host and co-founder of Capstone Leadership Solutions. Join me and my insightful guests each week as we share actionable insights for navigating the crucial people side of the business of healthcare. Subscribe now for a weekly dose of Culture Change RX. Now let's dive into this week's conversation where culture change takes center stage.
Welcome to this week's episode. We are having a run of our solo episodes this month, and these solo episodes are called Culture Bytes. And it's me again here, Sue Tetzlaff, in the studio all by myself. And the topic today for this episode is a tactic that we call managing up. And so I'll get into what that means in just a second, but I'll put it in context here of the work that we do in healthcare organizations to elevate both the employee experience and the patient experience. There's some tactics that we've bundled together into something we call the positive communication standards. Our partner organizations that we work with, they might rebrand them as something else, but generically, when we're introducing them in organizations, we call these 12 tactics the 12 positive communication standards. And it's typically the patient experience team or the team that is purposed, employee-driven team purposed with elevating both safe and satisfying care in the organization that typically owns bringing and keeping these tactics alive in the workplace. And what we know in our work long term with multiple organizations is that communication is very key in having a great employee and patient experience. There's just so many ways that we know this is true. One example of that is if you take, in our organization, my hospital had done this, we took all of the comments from a whole quarter's worth of patient satisfaction surveys that were returned, and we analyzed those. And we actually had rooms full of employees analyzing those comments, and we had them highlight anything that had to do with communication, like it was very positive related to communication, or it was negative, or communication could have fixed it or prevented it, or communication is what made it great for the patient or family member that was filling out the survey. And 80, 90+% of the comments that people will actually take the time to make related to their experience as reported on these surveys had a connection with communication. And so that's just one example of how we see evidence that communication is so important. As part of this work to elevate the patient and employee experience in the healthcare organizations that we're partnered with, we've over time been able to create this bundle of 12 positive communication standards, which is 12 simple tactics. Really, they're all common sense, just usually not commonly consistently practiced. And there's another episode a while back, not too long ago, that I did on the positive communication standard of hallway hospitality. So that's also one of the 12 positive communication standards. But today I wanted to talk about another one because it's so connected to especially the people side of healthcare, whether it's the people interactions with patients and family members or visitors, but also with each other, is this tactic that we call managing up. And what managing up is really a communication tactic where you're positioning others or other organizations, people, or services in a positive light. And the reason you're communicating in this way is to increase confidence, trust, and to put others at ease. And so I'm going to use a pretty extreme example of this that I actually used early in my days of learning this and using it myself as a healthcare leader. It's a pretty extreme example, but it kind of shows the power of it and the why about increasing confidence and trust and putting others at ease, which is the why of using a tactic like managing up. So, in my hometown that I live in, Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, we have an annual I-500 snowmobile race. So, yes, snowmobiles race around a track at these top speeds, and there's lots of them, and sometimes there's crashes and sometimes there's injuries. So our local hospital is obviously ramped up and on alert to be able to be of service to anyone that is ill or injured at the track, whether it's a racer or the large amount of spectators that come in to watch the race. So it's kind of a busy time, and we can expect it to be a busy time at our community hospital. Well, I happen to be the administrator on call as the chief nursing officer, and I was incident command and on site and with our trauma teams and all of our amped up surgical staff and ER and ICU and all of that, all ready for what may happen. And unfortunately, there was on that given day a situation where we were going to be receiving a patient from the track. He was a racer and he had crashed on the track and he was coming in cardiac arrest. He was actually quite a young man that was coming to us. And while he was on his way in the ambulance to the back bay of our ER, in the front lobby area near our ER, coming in was his wife and two of his small children. And so I was helping out by going to greet the wife and children in the front lobby while her husband was coming in by ambulance in cardiac arrest. Just a very traumatic, awful experience. So this just paints the scenario, like I said, a pretty extreme scenario where I'm a healthcare worker that's going to be engaging with an upset family member, a worried, concerned, probably scared out of her mind family member. And she's a stranger to us. You know, she's from out of town. She doesn't know our organization. She doesn't know our healthcare system. She doesn't know our doctors. So really, she is a stranger to us and therefore has no history to build up confidence or trust or be at ease with who is caring for her husband. And so I'm the one to greet her. I've been trained on this tactic of managing up. And so this is an opportunity for me to be able to put this skill to use. And it was truly as simple as my greeting her with a lot of compassion and caring, obviously, to build a little bit of rapport with her, but then to pretty quickly communicate in a way that introduces her, in a way that positions our people, our team, our organization in a positive light that helps her to build confidence and trust and put her at ease in this very serious situation. And so I was able to introduce myself, who I was, how I could help her, and also then start to introduce her to the team. And we had obviously just an amazing team on call that day, expecting, ready for being able to help in these kind of ways. And by introducing, you know, who the head of our cardiac team was and his background and his experience, those kind of things, I could just see just by my taking that time to introduce her to the qualifications of our team and the readiness of our team, and then to introduce her and position in a positive light our ability to care for her and her loved ones that were with her, and to engage her in the process of the witness resuscitation and those kind of things. So I could introduce her to our team, our organization, and our process quite quickly and do it in such a way that built her confidence. That was just such an example where I could even see even though she was obviously, very upset, very worried, very concerned, I could see that I was helping through my words, through my communication to start to put her at least as much at ease as could even be humanly possible in such a tragic situation and crisis. And so that's a pretty extreme situation of being able to use this communication tactic, but it might be an example of where it is needed most. And we should make sure that in these situations we think about even what seems like a simple tactic and put it to use for the benefit of the patient and or their loved one. So really, again, it's a communication tactic that positions people or services in a positive light. And so it really is a form of introduction. And if you're a caregiver, if you are an employee that's interacting with patients or family member, introducing ourselves is a good thing to do. And sometimes we think, geez, we don't want to introduce ourselves in such a way that seems boastful or bragging. We're training like a phlebotomist or a radiology tech to introduce themselves and really mention about their certifications and their credentials and their training and maybe even some of the volumes of services they provided is, I have been doing mammography for 10 years. I'm certified. I've done X thousands of mammography exams. I mean, sometimes it sounds like you're bragging about yourself. And a lot of employees will say that they're a little bit uncomfortable about doing that. And it's hard for them to get used to doing that. But really, it's like a muscle, right? Like once you get used to doing, you can't even imagine not doing it. It just becomes how you do your work, not extra work. And that's kind of what we want it to be, is that it just becomes natural and routine and comfortable. But that only comes over time. So introducing yourself in that kind of way is a form of managing up. And it's not bragging or being boastful. And it's not for you. You're not doing it for you. You're doing it to put the others at ease and build confidence and trust. And even compliance. Like sometimes patients will be more compliant with the process if they know that the person that is engaging them in the process knows their stuff, right? And so they're going to take your advice and they're going to follow your direction. And so that can actually make it easier for you to do your work because that trust, confidence, and even compliance and ease is there. So you're not really doing it for yourself, you're doing it for them, but you could get that benefit as well when you introduce yourself in a way that really positions yourself in a positive light and puts the patient at ease. And then managing up others. And I love this too. Like I was managing up that cardiac team that was in that emergency room that was caring for this woman's husband. And so that's an example of managing up others. So we can do that like in the example that I gave, but there's lots of ways we can do that in healthcare. Like when we manage up from shift to shift. So if I'm, working a med surg unit where there's 24-hour care of patients and we're handing off from shift to shift, whether that's 8 hours or 12 hours or whatever, when we hand off our care of the patient to the next shift, that's a great opportunity to be able to manage up the next person who will be caring for the patient and introduce them. Yes, they can introduce themselves in a more detailed way with the patient as well. But when you, as well as the one handing off to them, also introduces them in a positive light, that again transfers that trust, puts the patient at ease during that transition. That could be when we're transferring a patient from one unit to another, from the ER to an inpatient unit, from the surgery to an inpatient unit, from one department to another, from radiology back and forth to the inpatient units, whatever it is. So when we're moving the patient around and transferring care from different departments or different providers, it is great to not just introduce yourself, introduce the others, but maybe even manage up the other departments. So if a patient is being transferred from ICU to the general medical floor, you want to put that critical care patient that's been in the hands of critical care providers, you want to position the med-surg unit as being a great place for them to receive that next level of care, and that they, again, are put at ease in that transition. And so we can even manage up external organizations and providers as well. So if we're referring a patient to a specialist, if we're transferring them by ambulance to another level of care, you can manage up the ambulance personnel, you can manage up the providers and the organization that's going to be receiving them. Again, start to build that confidence, trust, compliance, and putting others at ease. So really managing up is truly about introducing yourself, introducing others, whether that's people, organizations, departments, service lines, or whatever. Now, one precursor to being able to do this well is you got to get to know people, right? So what if I didn't know who was in the ER working that day? What if I didn't know my counterpart that was going to be assuming care for the next shift? What if I didn't know the people down on med-surg when I was an ICU nurse? Those kind of things. So this really compels us to get to know each other, to build relationships, really start to be able to know a bit about each other so that we can manage them up. Now, before we close out this episode, I want to make sure that I also mention that this tactic of managing up is not just for clinicians. So non-clinicians can manage up too. Again, it is a form of introduction. So think about non-clinicians, who they introduce themselves to. It may be a new coworker, a new employee. It may be just you handing off work assignments between shifts or departments, and really even being able to speak positively and manage up your organization in the community. So there you go, a tactic that you can add to your toolkit if you don't have it in there already, a tactic we call managing up. And it's a communication tactic that you can use every single day in all sorts of ways, whether you're a clinician or non-clinician, whether it's an extreme critical situation or just a simple little interaction between you and another. Thank you for tuning in for this week's Culture Byte, and we will see you again next Wednesday.
Thanks for tuning in to Culture Change RX. If you found value in today's episode and you are a believer in fostering change in healthcare, join us in making a difference. Follow, rate, and review our podcast on your favorite platform. Share it with colleagues and your network. Together, we can make a lasting impact. Until next week, keep inspiring positive change.